Hi everyone, today we're speaking with Jim Dieugenio about the Kennedy assassination and also about Hollywood's take on Kennedy in Parkland, the new movie that's being released tomorrow, and what Hollywood got wrong. Stay with us.
What I think Vince did in that book was he kind of discounted or completely left out certain parts of the Warren Commission that he knew that he couldn't really rebut. So he gives the illusion that he's rebutted all this stuff without ever actually doing so. And you would think a guy who writes 2,646 pages certainly wouldn't have enough time to go over almost everything, you know. But he left certain things out of the book which he really couldn't find a way to counter. You know, and that's what I did in my review of his book. I indicated some of these things.
Let's take a look just for a second, because you put this in your book in Reclaiming Parkland, that I guess is sort of is a shot across the bow for me, is incredibly persuasive about the amount of material that exists. So Bugliosi is in favor of, I mean, he goes completely for the Warren Commission's report, but since that, there have been, and you outline this, 7 different investigations, including the Warren Commission inquiry. And you said in 1994 to 98, the Assassination Records Review Board released an additional 2 million pages of confidential material. And so basically, if one, like Bugliosi, is to write about the Kennedy assassination, this is, I mean, how much are we looking at here? And what do you think of these different inquiries? I mean, and it's in your book, but if you could give our viewers like a sense, are some of the points that he just kind of glossed right over that are in government inquiries?
Okay. To answer the first question,
right.
There's 4 million pages of documents now at the National Archives. The ARB, which worked from 94 to 98, doubled the amount of pages. There were 2 million to begin with, now there's 2 million more. As far as the official inquiries go, there's about 49 volumes, you know, to investigate, all right? So it's quite an incredible mass of things to investigate. Now, in the book, I detailed several things that you would really expect a guy who spends 2,646 pages to include in the book. All right, for example, he left out the point about Ruby's polygraph test, in which this was done in 1964 for the Warren Commission. It was an FBI agent who had been in Hoover's service for 14 years. It was not professionally reviewed until the House Select Committee on Assassinations convened, which was over 10 years later. They convened a 3-man professional panel who said that the FBI violated at least 12 different protocols of good polygraph practice, all right? The most important one was the so-called GSR, which is a galvanic skin response, which is very sensitive to emotions and feelings that can surface when someone's not telling the truth. Well, they found out that the FBI turned that machine down to a 25% level at the beginning of the test and then lowered it from that point on, which the proper practice would have been to raise it, you know, as the test went on. Well, that's right in the House Select Committee report, and it's the most stark and striking finding of that report. Now, Bugliosi read that report, okay? Somehow he didn't find enough space in 2,646 pages to include that very important point in his book, all right? There's another really interesting point. In my opinion, this is the most explosive discovery of the entire ARB investigation. They brought in the original autopsy photographer, a guy named John Stringer. And he, if you look in the House Select Committee volumes, he's supposed to have photographed, you know, Kennedy's body and in the supplementary autopsy, Kennedy's brain. When they brought him in to the National Archives and they showed him the pictures that are there now of Kennedy's brain, okay, he was stunned. Can I see those pictures? He asked for the pictures. And he starts looking at the pictures, and then he starts looking at the edge marks, you know, and then he starts examining them, you know, to see how the process was made. And he says, I don't use this kind of film. I've never used this kind of film to take pictures. And this is what they call a press pack. It was done with that kind of, I never used a press pack methodology. So Jeremy Gunn, the chief counsel of the ARB, then asked him, the $64,000 question, and he says, can you say that you took these pictures of President Kennedy? He goes, no, I did not take these pictures. So this is very, very important, because if you examine what he did, if you examine the actual process of the whole supplementary autopsy with the brain, in my opinion, the reason those pictures are not his is because there was too much brain damage for one, because the Warren Commission says there was one bullet that went through Kennedy's head. Okay, in my opinion, that's why somebody took a second set of pictures. Well, you would think that that would be in Bugliosi's book, but it's not, all right? And like I said, I think that's the most important development of the entire ARB. Let me bring up just one more point. One of the most explosive things that turned out in the early years was when Josiah Thompson, for his book 6 Seconds in Dallas, went to see a guy named O.P. Wright, who was a security director at Parkland Hospital. He was supposed to have given the bullet, the magic bullet CE-399, to the Secret Service that day. All right. Well, when Thompson went to interview him, he brought a picture of CE-399, which is a round-nosed, copper-jacketed bullet. They call it a military jacketed type of bullet. And so he said, "Is this the picture that you turned over to the? Is this a bullet rather that you turned over to the Secret Service?" He goes, "No." He goes, "That wasn't the bullet I turned over." And he, since he's a security director, he opens up a drawer and he takes out a kind of lead-colored, what they call pointy-edged kind of hunting round. He goes, "That's the kind of bullet that I gave to the Secret Service that day." And so Thompson, in his book, in the note, says, if this is true, then it appears somebody substituted the bullet. And if that's true, then it looks like the Kennedy assassination was an inside job. You know, so these are the things that he leaves out of the book, which I believe are all crucial.
What about the rifle? I found this to be really interesting and something that I didn't know about the rifle that Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly used.
All right. Now this is utterly fascinating, because nobody really talks about this, because for the first 20 years of the Kennedy case, everybody thought that this was, as they say, a fait accompli. Oswald ordered the rifle, etc. Well, it didn't turn out until several years later, after that, into the 90s, that people began to question that transaction, because there's several things that are very irregular about the way the Warren Commission presents this thing. To give you one example, we're supposed to believe that Oswald ordered the rifle, I believe, on March 12th. The official story says he ordered it from Klein's Sporting Goods in Chicago, which is over 700 miles away from Dallas-Fort Worth. Well, if you follow what the Warren Commission says, they would have you believe Oswald mailed this at about 10:30 in the morning on March 12th. It flew 750 miles to Chicago. It was sorted at their main post office box. It was then distributed to their minor post office station. It was then delivered to Klein's. Klein's then separated out all the stuff, the money orders from the cash and the checks, deposited it into their bank account in 24 hours. And I'm reading this, I go, wait a second. I pay my mortgage. It doesn't get there. It's in the same city. It doesn't get there in 24 hours, let alone get deposited into the account. So that's just one of the things that's hard to believe. The other thing is that if you read the Warren Commission, Oswald did not order that rifle in his own name. He supposedly had this alias named Heidel. Well, the post office has regulations saying that we don't turn over merchandise to somebody who doesn't have their name on the P.O. box, all right? The question then becomes, how did that merchandise, in this case a rifle, actually get to the P.O. box if it actually was not in his name? And by the way, this is right in these postal regulations. You can actually download them in certain places on the internet. So they violated that. You know, we're supposed to believe that this thing went 750 miles in a 24-hour period. Another important point, we have to believe that Oswald was at the post office when he bought the money order. He didn't mail it at the post office because it has a certain number on the envelope. Back in those days, which was before zip codes, you went by these area numbers. He didn't mail it at the post office, he then walked something like 2.5 miles out of his way and put in a mailbox. And the whole time, by the way, he's supposed to be at work. So in other words, and on his time card,
He's supposed to be at work when it's being mailed.
right, his time card has nothing in there about him leaving and then coming back, which is important because at that job that he had at the time, you went by job you were working on, okay, and you were accounted for 2.5 hours on this, et cetera. So none of this is recorded at the place that he worked at. So this whole transaction, has really, really come into question, of recent times. My opinion today is I don't think Oswald ever ordered that rifle. If you believe the Warren Commission, the rifle that Oswald ordered was a 36-inch rifle, which is usually qualified as a carbine. The rifle that was supposedly found in the Texas School Book Depository is a 40-inch rifle that is classified as a short rifle. All right. Further, when the House Select Committee interviewed the gunsmith at Klein's, they asked him, did you put scopes on the 36-inch rifle? Yes. Did you put scopes on the 40-inch rifle? No. This rifle had a scope. Who put the scope on it? All right, it wasn't Oswald. All right, so in addition to all those things which are so problematic, how are you supposed to believe they gave the guy the wrong rifle? I mean, when you order a pair of shoes and they're out of those shoes, they send you a different model? Not in my experience.
And this one said made in Italy.
Right.
Here's the interesting thing to me. The way Bugliosi deals with it is it's supposed to just be a mistake.
Right. They're supposed to mistake a Mauser for the Mannlicher Carcano. But the problem with that, of course, is on the Mannlicher Carcano, it's stamped made in Italy. Now, Mauser is not an Italian word. Okay, it's a German word.
Yeah.
And anybody who has any experience in rifles would understand that. It says 6.5 made in Italy. Now, the first rifle reported, if I remember correctly, was a 7.35 Mauser.
Yes.
Okay, it was a completely.
I just remember the Mauser thing.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a completely different rifle and a completely different caliber. And the other thing is, the FBI found a Mauser shell in Dealey Plaza that day, and that was kept secret for over 30 years, finally declassified by the ARB. Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA agent and an FBI informant. He was being set up in New Orleans in the summer of 1963. All right. Then he was manipulated by the white Russian community in Dallas, George Morenschild, Ruth and Michael Payne, et cetera, to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. All right. And then afterwards, you have a totally corrupt Dallas Police Department, which I mentioned in the book is probably the worst of any police department at that time, who wanted to get a guy because of the Tippit shooting. That really energized the Dallas police to get somebody. And Oswald was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And afterwards, when he wasn't shot at the Texas Theater, which I believe was the original plan, I believe the CIA got together with their old allies, the Mafia, probably Trafficante or Louis McWillie, and said, we got to get rid of this guy. Can't let him go to trial. And Ruby was brought in to shoot Oswald. Then the autopsy that night was completely and utterly controlled, not by the doctors, but by the military guys who were there. And that was the final dose of the cover-up.
Yeah, the autopsy stuff is pretty...
It's devastating.
It is. And you guys, you have to read this because it really sets it out. And we may be sitting here just talking about it and giving you little snippets of what's in the book. But I have to tell you, Jim, point by point, footnote by footnote, interview by interview, he sets it out. So now the reason that you were so interested also in doing this is because you write, is because we have this film coming out that everybody's going to take as we often do, as the reflection of real history. And my first question, I guess, is that you said you write that, quote, for as the Pentagon's liaison to Hollywood, you talk about the fact that the Pentagon has a liaison in Hollywood, that everybody who's doing a film that has anything to do with war, they have to deal with him, Mr. Straub, right?
Right.
And that he can force film producers, and this is a quote from your book, to not just alter their screenplays, but to eliminate entire scenes, and he's done so. And my question to you is, in what context has he?
Yeah, look, I don't think anybody's going to argue that people in making a film about a complex subject or a subject takes place over a long period of time are going to have to use dramatic license. But in my opinion, the issue of dramatic license should be governed, by what is the general truth of what happened, all right? Now, the general truth of what happened in the Warren Commission is that the Warren Commission did something very bad. They covered up the circumstances of the murder of President Kennedy, all right? So if you're gonna use dramatic license there, it should be to present both sides of the story. The script that I read of Parkland, which I have to say, and I devoted a chapter to this in this book, in my opinion, it went right down the Warren Commission line, every single scene, all the way to the end of the movie, And in my opinion, that is not, a good use of dramatic license.
So, but if they do go to see it, what should they keep in mind, and how do they should keep their facts straight? I mean, what would you recommend should be in the back of their head?
One of the things that's important that's completely left out of the film is that at Parkland, something like 17 witnesses saw a blown out back of Kennedy's skull, okay? A huge gaping wound in the back of his head, which most people would think, if there's a huge gaping wound of exit in the back of his head, it must have come from the front. Oswald was not in front of Kennedy. He was always behind him. Now, the House Select Committee lied about this in their report. They said the Parkland people saw one thing, but the people at Bethesda didn't see this. Well, it turns out when the Assassination Record Review Board declassified the records of the medical investigation of the House Select Committee, guess what? 20 more witnesses at Bethesda saw this blown out back of the head. Now, that's in the script that I read, that doesn't appear. So in other words, one of the very key foundations of the case, the fact that the back of his head was blown off, is not in this movie. And you got 17 witnesses who saw it at Parkland. None of them mention it. That's censorship.
Yeah, and I think it's troubling. I mean, I think that you can go to a movie and you can enjoy a film, but you need to go there with some intelligence and some understanding of history and enjoy it as a fictional film, because basically that seems to be what it is at this point, right?
Right.
You can still enjoy a fictional film.
Right.
I want to thank you so much for being here. James's book, like I said, is available. If you guys have any questions, post them on the Facebook page, on the Media Mayhem Facebook page. Jim, you're exactly the kind of guest that we want on our show.
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed our conversation, because this is exactly what Media Mayhem is for. It's to take a look at what we are told and to look behind it and go to the sources and the people that do the actual work to find out what the truth is. And you can read this book, read Bugliosi's book, make your own decisions. Nobody's telling you what to think, but read and consider and be thoughtful about history, and don't just take what's fed to you by the government. See you next time on Media Mayhem.